Back in 2014, I joined a Facebook group that was started specifically for people who are from the town I grew up in Southern California. The whole group shared memories of the town, and everyone seemed nice, except for one person. There's always at least one asshole. This guy got on the bad side of one of the admins, whose name was Robert, and ended up being booted from the group. I'll note that I was in my mid-30s at the time, and most of the members were at least 20 years older than me. Robert was approaching 60 and was married with children who were about my age. Robert took a liking to me. Since he was married, I didn't think his friendship would go any further than that, but I was mistaken. He said that I was a down-to-earth girl and was easy to talk to. He and I exchanged phone numbers, and he would message me quite a bit. However, Robert took it a step further and found out where I lived, my landline number, and my mother's address in California. He had a subscription to one of those sites that contain information on people, their age, phone numbers, possible relatives, previous addresses, etc. He found out through Facebook when my birthday was, and he sent me flowers. I thanked him, but I started to get suspicious. His behavior was becoming alarming. He started complaining that all his wife wanted from him was his pain pills and money. Around this time, I met the man who would eventually become my husband, and of course, I announced it on Facebook. Robert went into a ballistic rage upon hearing this, saying that I should have known that he was in love with me. I told him, "You're married. Why are you in love with another woman?" He began texting me at least 10 to 20 times a day, going from calling me hateful names to profusely apologizing. I blocked his number, so he started blowing up my landline. Most of the time I kept it unplugged, so I didn't get most of the voicemails that he would leave. One day, out of curiosity, I did listen to some of the voicemails I got. In one of the messages, he claimed that I owed him $13,000. He then started making threats about how he would come to where I lived and would also pay my mother a visit. I blocked him on my landline and informed my mother about the situation. Robert got clever and started texting me from random numbers located all over California. He even sent letters to my home, and nothing he said in those letters made any sense. That's when I decided that I needed a restraining order. I tried twice through my county court, but since I lived in Washington State at the time, the judge wouldn't grant it since we lived in different states. Once Robert found out that I couldn't file a restraining order, he sent me more hateful messages and told me that I would never get rid of him. So I went back to court with the new messages. For this new hearing, Robert mailed in a letter of rebuttal. He claimed that he was a civil servant who had worked at a school district at one time and was an electrician by trade. He also said that he was on disability and couldn't drive longer for more than a half an hour without experiencing excruciating pain, and posed the question, how could he possibly come to Washington State? I told the judge that this wasn't true because he openly posted all day about his motorcycle trips to Malibu on Facebook. Regardless of the evidence, I wasn't granted a restraining order, and I felt failed by the system. I blocked him on all social media, emails, and phone numbers, but he obviously would still call using new numbers. He made a duplicate Facebook page with my profile picture and sent out friend requests to all of my friends. He had my real Facebook profile blocked, and I found out when a friend messaged me, "I got a friend request from you, but I already thought we were friends." My friend then told me that this fake profile of mine was making all kinds of posts talking shit about me. My friend reported it, and thankfully Facebook took it down. I changed my cell phone number, and I eventually moved into a new place. Things died down for a while, but Robert somehow found me on LinkedIn. After that, I straight up deleted LinkedIn and Facebook, and I saw that he even followed me on my YouTube page. I don't know how to remove someone, so I just blocked him there. The last time I heard from Robert was an email that I received from an account with the name John Sims. I knew it was him because he references trying to find my brother years back, and how I asked him for his help, I didn't ask anyone for help, by the way, because I don't have a relationship with my brother, because he has a drug addiction problem and is a diagnosed schizophrenic. To wrap up this insane story, I'll include a screenshot of the email he sent and a recording of some of the messages he left.
Hey, I need you to unblock me and respond to me, please. Would you consider doing that? It's the Christian thing to do, don't you think? Please, I'm not playing around. Bye. Look, if you don't respond to me, you're not leaving me too many choices here, and there only leaves me one, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to blindside you. I wish you would just talk to me. We could work this out, but obviously you don't want that. But you're not leaving me much of choice, and I won't be going after a paycheck. Bye.
I'm a bit rusty on storytelling, but I'll do my best. My name is Kaitlyn. I'm a 21-year-old female, but I was 19 at the time. I had recently taken over my parents' 2-bedroom apartment in Kentucky with my 2 dogs, Kylo and Finn. I invited my boyfriend Isaac and my friend Aaron to come and live with me. They would have to share the rent, of course. The apartment wasn't in the best area. A lot of addicts roamed around at night, but it was affordable and allowed me to have my pets. To help with the story, I'll have to explain the layout of my apartment building. The building had 3 stories. The bottom was a basement level with 2 apartments and a parking garage. There were stairs that led to the 2nd story, which consisted of 4 apartments, mine being directly to the left. Beside my door was another flight of stairs that led up to the 3rd floor. I lived in one of the 2 apartments on the 2nd floor that had a yard, since they were technically on ground level. One night Isaac and I were walking the dogs, and planned on settling down and going to bed afterwards. We went around the building because my dogs were not very friendly to strangers, and someone had just pulled up out front. Kylo and Finn are both 45-pound border collies, and while they don't seem like much, their barks are deep and intimidating. I always tried to not let them scare our neighbors or their kids. Plus, I would never want them to hurt anyone. I don't think that they would, but I'm not going to take a chance on it. I love my dogs very much, but a lawsuit does not sound fun to deal with. While they were using the bathroom and I was talking with Isaac, we noticed a guy in a pink shirt leaning against the wall of the apartment across from ours. At the time, the apartment was vacant and was used for storage. Nobody lived there, and nobody ever used it at night. So seeing this guy standing there was a bit sketchy, but we paid him no mind. The man then calls out to us, "Hey!" We ignored him, since we had no idea who he was, and again, my dogs are not very friendly to strangers. Finn obviously heard this and started growling and barking, causing Kylo to do the same. So I whispered to my boyfriend, "Let's just avoid this creep and go back around front so the dogs can finish up." We continued as normal while the dogs sniffed around. Our conversation was cut short again as my dog started barking and growling. Towards the entrance of the building was the man in the pink shirt, watching us. We had walked further down into the other yards to avoid him, and there he was in front of our building. There was no telling how long he had been there, watching us. As soon as we noticed him, he left the entrance and walked through the yard and disappeared behind the building. The dogs finished up their business, and we headed for the front entrance. As soon as we got to the door, the guy in the pink shirt and some other guy with glasses were darting up the back stairwell towards us. I ushered my boyfriend and the dogs inside and slammed the door and quickly locked it as soon as they reached it. We hadn't lived in the area long, but I had gotten to know some of the other tenants in the building, as well as some of the people in the neighboring apartment building. This was so strange and out of nowhere for me. I had never seen these guys around these buildings before. Just like clockwork, there were 3 gentle, spaced-out knocks. I looked through the peephole and saw the 2 men standing outside our front door. I was definitely not going to open the door to find out what they wanted. When we didn't open up, they knocked again. Again, we refused to answer. You'd think that they would give up and just go away, but instead they proceeded to bang on our door and yell at us. "Open the fucking door!" At this point, we started freaking out, and Aaron had come out of his room and was watching the back windows, and Isaac kept an eye on the front door. After a while, the knocking and shouting died down. That's when Isaac said, "Hey, I think they left. I don't see anyone out there now." We started to calm down, but that didn't last long. Aaron then shouted, "They're looking out our windows. I think they're trying to find a way inside." We then hear a loud thump come from one of the windows, followed by Aaron shouting, "They threw a rock at the window. What the hell is going on? Who are these guys?" There then came a loud, scratching noise at the front door. Isaac rushed to look. The man in the glasses would step out of view of the peephole and would stand right next to the door. They would continue to bang on our door demanding that we come out, all the while making that scratching sound or throwing things at our windows. None of us felt comfortable calling the cops because we were hardcore stoners with paraphernalia all over our apartment, and of course we had smoked earlier that day. So paranoia got the better of us, and it just didn't seem like a good idea to call the police. Instead, I went to the very back of my apartment, where I couldn't be heard, and called my parents. My dad is a big guy, 6'3", and built like a tank. My mom answered the phone, and once I informed her of the situation, she used my dad's phone to call my cousin. My cousin lived closer to me and also owned a gun, so he bolted over in his Jeep and parked across the street from our apartment so we could view the inside of the entryway. He confirmed that the guys were running around and hiding, going around the building and trying to find a way inside. One of them even attempted to crawl up the balcony. My mom told my cousin not to confront them and to wait for her and my dad to show up. These guys kept this up for 40 minutes. Eventually, my cousin lost sight of them. Soon after, my parents got there and saw a group of people in a big circle beating the shit out of the guy in the pink shirt. I immediately came out of my apartment and watched as my mom got out of the car screaming, "Who the hell was knocking on my daughter's door?" Everyone scattered, and the guy in the glasses pointed at the guy in the pink, now bloodstained, shirt, who was just getting off the ground. I watched as my dad walked up to him and asked him what his problem was. He then stuttered out a half-assed apology and said, I didn't mean to." My dad proceeded to ask him why he kept at it for an hour. After more mumbling, my dad picked up the guy by his shirt and flung him at least 4 feet away. I'll never forget how my dad yelled at him to get the hell away and to never come back to these apartments again. Right after this, the cops pulled up and asked us what was going on. Eventually, the cops explained that they had received a call about a group of people beating up some kid. So the call wasn't even related to the non-stop harassment that me and my roommates endured. They confirmed that something had happened at my door because of the long, deep scratch marks, which they concluded were made by a knife. I can't even imagine how the situation would have gone if we would have opened that door. It turns out that the kid had confused my boyfriend for some other guy he wanted to fight, who lived in the building next to ours. After our lease was up, we all moved away. Aaron went back to his home state, and Isaac and I moved in with my parents. About 4 months later, my mom found an article about the same guy. His name was Isaiah Harvey. He burned down a house in a nearby town. I'll include 2 screenshots of the article. I'm so glad that we didn't open the door that night, and we didn't have our apartment burned down with my dogs inside of it. I can never thank my dad enough for getting there as fast as he did, or my cousin for coming and keeping an eye out. As a final note, seriously guys, always be aware of your surroundings. If you get a weird feeling about someone, it's best just to stay the hell away from them. This happened in the summer of 2019. I'm from Morgan Hill, California, but this story happened in the town next to mine, Gilroy. Every year, Gilroy throws a festival to attract people to the local businesses and to generate a little revenue. I used to go every year when I was a kid with my family, but the festival became more and more shady as the years went by. I was 21 at the time, and my boyfriend Will and I were going to meet up with my aunt and cousin at their booth. It was their first year as vendors, so I wanted to show my support. 3 important things to note. 1, it was my boyfriend's first time going. 2, my cousin was 8 months pregnant at the time. And 3, my cousin's first daughter had decided not to go that day, so she stayed with my uncle at his house, which was down the street from where the festival was. We parked at my uncle's house and said our hellos before walking over. Luckily for us, we got in free because of my aunt. I noticed the security wasn't very tight, because Will walked in with his Leatherman multi-tool in his belt, and they didn't even bother checking me. After making our way through the crowd, we finally got to the tent where my family was. Maybe after 25 minutes of being there, my cousin went off to the bathroom, and Will walked off to take a look at another booth while I was still talking with my aunt. 5 minutes go by, and I hear a loud pop. Everyone around either thinks it came from the jump house 200 feet away, or a firecracker went off. For once, I listened to my instincts and made eye contact with my aunt. Within the next 30 seconds, rapid gunfire and bullets were flying through the tents, as hundreds of people were screaming and running for their lives. Like everybody else, I jumped for cover, and I saw 2 kids standing still. I threw them under me to protect them, and their mom came running over and jumped on top of me to protect all 3 of us. They eventually crawled out and hid next to a table that had been turned over. I laid flat on my stomach, watching my aunt. I heard her screaming for my cousin, and that's when I really started to panic. I had always heard that in dangerous situations, you have one of 2 responses: fight or flight. Mine was fight. I stood up and ran out of the tent, screaming for my cousin. Bullets were still flying past me, and I stayed as low as possible to make my way towards the bathrooms. However, I never made it past the tent, because Will appeared out of nowhere and yanked me by my ankle, and dragged me under the table that he was hiding under. My boyfriend is a very calm and collected guy, so seeing his face turn white scared the hell out of me. I then heard a loud whistle, followed by something falling on my head. I felt my hair, and discovered that a bullet casing had landed on me. During all the commotion, we somehow didn't realize that the shooter had been standing right next to us. Will and I made a break for it, and I ran so fast that I kicked my left shoe off. It's a miracle that we didn't get mowed down by this psychopath. Finally, the cops showed up and began to open fire at the shooter, causing him to take cover. My brain clicked that I needed to run. Another thing to note here is that I was a cross-country and track athlete for years, but I had to stop because of a knee injury. But in that moment, it was like my body said fuck it, and my knee snapped into place, and I ran like I was in high school again. We made it out of the park, and I immediately called my uncle. He told us to get to his house fast. As soon as I saw him outside the house, I collapsed into his arms, crying my eyes out, saying that I couldn't find my aunt or my cousin. 15 minutes later, we see my aunt and her friend who had been working the booth with her. They came around the corner, and then we hugged and cried for what felt like an hour. Neither of them had heard from my cousin, so we sat there waiting in fear. We finally got word from my cousin. She had been put onto a bus with a bunch of kids, and had been taken to a field where people parked their cars for the event. When we got there, we broke down in tears and embraced each other. She wasn't hurt, but she said the initial pop everyone heard was a misfire that landed by her feet. She said she looked up and saw the shooter reloading his gun and then taking aim into the crowd. And that's when all hell broke loose. We were in lockdown at my aunt's house for the next 6 hours. When the police finally let us go, I held Will's hand the entire ride home, asking if he was okay. He had been close to the shooter when everything went down. He ran through all the tents flipping tables out of his way to find me. He saw a guy getting shot and collapsed on who he assumed was his girlfriend. He saw her holding him, watching as the life faded from his eyes. He still doesn't like talking about that day. I ended up with one black eye, bruised and scratched knees, and a big lump on my forehead. I think whatever higher power out there that I only suffered these minor injuries. It took 3 months, but the FBI finally interviewed me and gave me my shoe back. They told us that it took so long to get our things back because of how close we were to the chaos. After going for therapy over the next year, I feel a lot less anxious talking about it. I still jump at loud bangs, but I'm still healing. 3 lives were ended that day, and the town of Gilroy still mourns their losses. Our community is trying to rebuild itself after this incident, and with COVID happening, I think it'll be some time before the festival is brought back. I think about that day quite often, and how lucky my family was to be able to walk away unscathed. I'll include a picture I took of myself that day. If you want to look up what happened, search Gilroy Garlic Festival Shooting 2019. And stay safe out there, everyone. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode of Based on True Events. If you enjoyed these narrations and would like your story to be featured in this series, please send in your written experience to unit522stories@outlook.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit, and as always, never forget. There's always